to the discussion of the upcoming ballot initiatives on the RTA. Before I do that, let me introduce our president-elect, Linda McCabe.
Hi, everybody. I'm Linda McCabe, and I'm the president-elect of the League of Women Voters of Greater Tucson. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization encouraging informed and active participation in government. We neither support nor oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government. We do, however, advocate for public policy such as voting rights, non-discrimination, education, natural resources, reproductive rights, civil rights, and criminal justice reform. We have been empowering voters and defending democracy in Greater Tucson for 85 years. We invite all people, regardless of gender, gender identity, ability, ethnicity, or race, to join us as we commit to building a stronger, more inclusive democracy. Barb?
Thank you. Before we really get started, let me have a moment of your time, go over a couple of rules. First, please keep your computer or phone muted. We don't want to be distracted by the neighbor's barking dog and stuff. And secondly, we don't want you to interrupt the speakers. I'm getting a little feedback, so I don't know if.
I'll keep trying to mute people.
Okay. But please mute yourselves. And second, don't unmute to interrupt the speakers. We want you to put your questions in the chat box, and we will get to them at the end of their talk. And hopefully we'll get to all the questions because I think we have enough time. So please just follow these few simple little rules. And there can be no recording of this besides our own. This will be available on our YouTube. So after this is over. So please recommend that to anybody who has missed this. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the two speakers today. First, there's Mike Ortega, a native of Douglas, who was the city administrator in Douglas before coming to Tucson. He has an undergraduate degree in civil engineering, a master's in business administration as well from the University of Arizona, and then he completed the executive management program from Harvard's program in state and local government. You probably know him best as the Tucson city manager for 9 years, one of the longest stints of any city manager we've had in Tucson, which I guess doesn't speak well for Tucson. Anyway, he is best remembered for re-securing Tucson's fiscal and budgetary stability. In June of 2025, Mike took on the interim director of the RTA. With him is John Bernal. Mr. Bernal is a Tucson native and also a graduate of the civil engineering at the University of Arizona. He has more than 45 years experience, primarily in transportation and federal and local government. John retired from Pima County in 2017 as the Deputy County Administrator for Public Works, which included the Department of Transportation and the Planning and Development Services. He was involved in the original Regional Transportation Authority established in 2006 and helped to implement Pima County projects and programs using RTA funding. So let me turn it over to these fine gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Appreciate that. Would you like us to just jump into the presentation?
You betcha.
Okay, we're ready to roll. John, if you don't mind, what I'll do is maybe go over the formal presentation and then turn it over to you for some comments. Unless you'd like to make your comments first, that's fine too.
No, that sounds great, Mike. Go ahead.
Okay, sounds great. So first of all, thank you for having me. A quick note, thank you for the introduction. Both John and I are recovering engineers. But one of the reasons that I went back and got my MBA was because of John Bernal. I used to work with him many, many years ago, and he inspired me and suggested that I look at the business side of things. So nice to be serving with him here. So first of all, the RTA Next is the 20-year plan for consideration in front of the voters. But it's important to understand what the Regional Transportation Authority and how it works and how it really is crafted or constituted. So there's a 9-member board. Those are my bosses. And by the way, Barbara, I'm no longer the interim. I'm actually the permanent director at RTA.
Oh, they got you, huh?
They got a hook in me. But the 9 members are made up of all of the municipalities within the county, as well as the county, and 1 member from ADOT, and that's an appointment that's made by the governor to the ADOT Transportation Board, and that serves as a representative. That group is basically authorized to go to the voters and ask them for approval of a plan and the funding that goes along with that plan. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. Next slide, please. The RTA, as I mentioned, is responsible for bringing forward a plan for the voters to consider. These are some pictures of some of the RTA 1 investments that have been made. As you can see, it really spans the entirety of the transportation system. Oftentimes, people think of transportation as simply roadways or for cars, but that is not the case. And as we go into the program, I'll outline it for you. But you can see there's investments, obviously and clearly, for vehicles, but also paratransit, which includes dial-a-ride. There's pedestrian investment, there's bicycle investment, and there's safety investment in terms of I'll call them on-demand crosswalks, like the hawk there on the bottom of the page there. Next slide, please. Here are some of the pieces that I can point to in terms of what the investment means. And this is specific to RTA in general, but it can also be for RTA Next. And it really, as you can see, identifies the transportation system that's needed to move people, goods, and services across the entirety of the region. And so it really doesn't matter what aspect of your life you focus on. Chances are pretty good that the goods, services, whether you go to the grocery store, you order online, you drive a vehicle, you ride your bike, or you walk, that you are somehow using or taking advantage of the transportation system across the entirety of the region. Next slide, please. So what does this all look like in terms of the dollars? And as Barbara mentioned, I really like numbers. And so this really became a focal point for me, was to really try to understand, what does the Regional Transportation Authority mean in terms of funding? So there's 2 asks in front of the voter. One is a plan, which we'll go into here in a bit, but the second is the funding for that plan. And so oftentimes people will ask, well, what does this mean and how does this look, right? Well, it's a half-cent sales tax that people are currently paying that would be extended for another 20 years. Now, that's important because as you look at the chemistry of the dollars that come into the region, this graphic shows that about $54 million comes into the region from state or federal sources. So these are state monies or federal monies that are allocated to the region, pretty constant, pretty stable. You can see that over the last several years, it's been a pretty stable amount. The RTA is the gray area that's above that, which is about 126 million. Just in 1 year, at least in this past fiscal year, it was $126 million that was brought in. So about 2/3 of the funding that is allocated for regional improvements, regional projects, comes from the RTA or from the half-cent sales tax. So what would it look like if it goes away? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but it basically is that orange and that green graphic there. Now, what's important about that is the state and the federal government are the ones that actually dictate what the rules are for the use of those dollars. So the voters will establish the rules for how the $125 million is invested. And what's important there is that the state and federal funding, even combined, will not address all of the needs, not only because of dollars, but because there are things that we can't spend those monies on. So, for example, transit operations cannot be spent from these two sources. There has to be a separate source, i.e. the RTA. And so the rules, if you will, are restrictive enough where it limits the transportation system investment as a whole if we just rely upon these two. Next slide, please. So the next question is, well, why do we need to go to half-cent sales tax? Well, we all pay gas tax, those of us who fill up our vehicles with gasoline. Yes, but you are actually paying the same amount per gallon that you were paying almost 30 years ago. And so if you think about that, I believe it's about 18 cents per gallon. It's the same amount that you were paying for all this time, which is great, except that because the vehicles are more efficient today, they're much more efficient, you see less gallons being sold, which means there's less revenue coming in, not to mention the increases in cost. And so imagine what we were doing 30 years ago and compare that to today in terms of the buying power of that investment. And I've heard numbers, but it's somewhere between 40 and 50% is really the buying power today of the same dollar from 30 years ago. So you can see that from an investment standpoint, we just don't have the same amount of money, and those declining revenues and resources have really led to deterioration of our road system and our infrastructure, as well as the just investment in transportation as a whole. Next slide, please. So the question then is, it's a transaction. The half-cent sales tax is a transaction-related tax. So anyone who has a purchase or a transaction within the county would pay the sales tax, with two big exceptions. And one of them is groceries, and the other are pharmaceuticals. Extremely important to know that those are not included in the sales tax. The rest of it is listed there on the screen. You can see pretty much all retail, et cetera, all the way through the rental of personal property. So all of those would pay the sales tax, which they are currently paying. They currently are paying that half-cent sales tax on all of those transactions, which, by the way, would expire June 30 of 26. This tax that's in front of the voters is Proposition 419, would be effective on April 1. Now, keep in mind that the way that the question is put before the voters, if the voters approve it, then the tax that they're paying now would cease on March 31st and then start on April 1, restart on April 1. So there is not an overlap of that. It is one tax that would be the same on or before the approval, if you will, as well as after the approval. So even though we would cease the current tax early, it is because it would be replaced with the new tax. Next slide, please. Again, I just mentioned that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, although there is a question about that. People have continually asked, well, is this a new tax? And yes, but it is continuing to pay the same in taxes. So if you think of it simplistically, today you're paying a half-cent sales tax. After the election, if it's approved, Proposition 419, you'd be paying the same in taxes that you're paying today. So that's not an additional cost. It's not an additional tax that is before the voters. Next slide, please. So let's talk in more detail about the plan. I think this is Proposition 418. And by the way, we generated these slides before we had the proposition numbers, and we decided not to change it. So this is basically the Proposition 418. It has 5 elements. The roadway corridor element is the one that gets the most attention oftentimes in a lot of areas, and that is the entirety of those corridors in terms of what the improvements look like. And so when you start looking at the 31 new projects, there's 31 new projects that are listed in RTA Next. 8 of those are lane widenings or capacity improvements. 5 of those are intersection improvements, including one new one, which is Moore Road. And there's 3 extensions of existing roads. And so basically what that is there's a road now, but there's a plan to extend it for whatever the distance is because of demand or because of congestion in the area. Now, one of the questions that comes up is, well, what about RTA 1? You see a lot of conversation around, well, you didn't finish all of RTA 1, and so why are you in front of the voter to ask for RTA Next? There are 7 projects that are included, aside from the 31 new ones. There's 7 projects that were included in RTA 1 that are on the ballot again for the RTA Next. 5 of those projects are projects that are, I'll call them rescoped. Rescoped is basically an engineering term for, hey, we know that the voter approved a certain configuration of the road back in 2006. And we know from today's analysis, we don't need that. We need something different. So I'll give you a couple of examples. North First Avenue from Grant Road to River. That was originally approved by the voter in 2006 as a 6-lane divided roadway. So the voters had said, hey, we want a 6-lane divided roadway for North First Avenue from Grant to River. Okay. 20 years later, or 19 years later, we now do an analysis, realize that, hey, the demand is not there for that through public feedback as well as analysis of the transportation and traffic. We realize that we only need 4 lanes. Well, it would be an inefficient use of resource, quite frankly, a waste of money if we were to build 6 lanes when we know we don't need it. So the idea is let's go back to the voter and say, hey, let's have a conversation about what we're projecting is needed now going forward, which is that 4 lanes. And you have an opportunity to weigh in. Another example is 22nd Street. 22nd Street on the west side from Keno Boulevard to I-10, again, was scoped at 6 lanes. We've done the analysis and found that we only need 4 lanes. So there's 5 projects like that that are rescoped or that we've actually identified because the population growth and the demand for some of these roads was not the same as what we thought or projected back in '06. We're going back to the voters. There's 2 projects, Tangerine Road on the very north side of town and Grant Road right near Urban Core that we need additional money for. So people ask, well, what happened? Why do you need additional money? When you look at the numbers in terms of the revenues that came into the entirety of the region over the last 20 years, we are actually about $1 billion short. There's $1 billion shortfall. And so people scratch their head and say, well, how could that possibly be? Well, for starters, the Great Recession. And in fairness, we were very optimistic. I think as I look back at the memorandums and all the conversations that were going on, we're very optimistic. Things are going to turn around. We'll be okay. We'll make it up. Well, it never materialized. On top of that, we had the COVID-19 pandemic. We also had huge inflationary costs that hit us a couple of years ago. All of those coupled together really demonstrate or show about $1 billion shortfall. Now, to the board's credit, they did put, remember that orange and that blue, those blue funding streams, they did put that towards projects, but it's just not enough. As you can see, when you get $54 million a year and you're $1 billion short, you just don't have enough. So we had to go back to the voter, and the conversation there really is we need additional money. And so the opportunity is for the voter to weigh in on it on those 2 projects. Again, it's Tangerine and Grant Road. So moving to the safety, ADA, and active transportation, that's the next element that's in the plan. And this is very specific to, we'll call them spot improvements for safety. You saw a picture earlier of an on-demand crosswalk. There's actually a picture of one there. But it also deals with safety, and we'll call them spot improvements as well across the entirety of the region. Now, people have said or suggested that, wow, Mike, you're only investing a small fraction of the entirety of RTA Next into safety. That's not true. I would suggest to you that virtually all of these investments are safety related. So and active transportation, which is bike and pedestrian. So for example, every roadway project, every roadway corridor that is improved has some type of safety improvement to it, as well as the bike and ped investment as well. And so that gives an opportunity for everyone to see, look, it's a total transportation system But we do have an opportunity for spot improvements as well, and that's that safety AD and active transportation. Again, active transportation, we'll call it non-motorized investment in or non-motorized transportation systems like pedestrian and bicycles as well. So arterial and collector road rehabilitation, about $178 million is allocated in the plan specifically for arterial and collector roads across the entirety of the region. And this was a direct reflection of the board going out and soliciting public feedback when the plan was originally crafted about a year and a half to 2 years ago. And people clamored and said, look, our pavement is in horrible condition across the entire of the region. It's great that we've got other roads and new roads and safety, et cetera, but we want investment in road pavement. And so this really is an opportunity for the region to invest in pavement rehabilitation. Now, keep in mind, this is not maintenance. This is not going out there. You're not going to see an RTA crew going out there and filling potholes. That's not what this is about. This is the entirety of rebuilding pavement that is deteriorated and prolonging the life, if you will. And so the design criteria, these have to last based on the design, a minimum of 10 years. And so when folks are looking at this and you see a road that's on the map, if you will, and I know that the city of Tucson has a map of what they're proposing, and they've got roads like Swan Road and Irvington Road and some other roads that are in very, very poor condition. Once they improve those roads using these dollars, they have to last a minimum of 10 years before maintenance or of any kind is really warranted. Now, I can tell you, putting my old engineer hat on, they really should be back out there in probably 7 or 8 years, maybe 9 years. But the base pavement is really focused on a 10-year lifespan. The environmental and wildlife linkages, there's about $50 million that's invested there. Those are not only what I'll call fencing and bridges for wildlife, like what we have up on the north side, up off just south of Catalina. This is also the opportunity to expand drainage culverts so that there is adequate capacity, not just for drainage, but also for wildlife to pass under the roadways. Again, with a focus on safety, because it's not just the safety of the animal, but also the motoring public and or folks that are walking and using their bikes. And so that investment is again, on a macro scale, all inclusive with regard to keeping everyone safe, including the animals. The last one that I have on the list here is transit. Transit, the current plan is $726 million for transit. This includes the paratransit and dial-a-ride services. Paratransit are for folks that have special needs, that need special attention and need to get to their appointments, whatever those might be. We have a service that's provided through this funding for that function or for that service. But it also is an opportunity for people that just don't have another way to get around, but that aren't able or aren't ambulatory enough to get to a bus stop, where they can pick up the phone or get on the app and they can call, and we call that dial-a-ride. So you basically call or dial, and then you get a ride to go to your place of business. Now, folks oftentimes ask me, is this supporting the fare free that's in the city of Tucson? I can tell you that the answer is no. This is separate from that conversation. The fare conversation is a policy decision by that of the city of Tucson Mayor and Council at this point. What I will tell you is that oftentimes people ask me, are you funding the city's transit? 41% of the transit budget is allocated to the city of Tucson for their paratransit and their dial-a-ride, as well as some of their fixed routes. On top of that 59% goes to the other areas. And there's areas that rely very heavily on it, like the Oro Valley community relies very heavily on paratransit and dial-a-ride. Now, I will also tell you that the leverage opportunity with transit, so that's $726 million, when leveraged with other funding from the county and from Marana, will actually be just shy of $1 billion of investment for transit for those services that I just mentioned. Next slide, please. So this is just a shot that nice black pavement. The conversation I already mentioned about this feedback on wanting pavement and making sure that we can get rid of some of the failing and poor roads. I just wanted to emphasize that really came from the public feedback. Next slide, please. So these are a couple of maps. Actually, there's 3 maps here. This first map is of the road network. And the first highlighted area, go ahead, Melanie. The first highlighted area, these are the 2006 roadways. So all of this green that you see on the screen here are all of the 2006 roadways that were included in RTA 1. Go ahead, next slide. These are the blue, both the solid blue, the dash blue, and then the bubbles, and I'll talk about all 3. The solid blue are the roadways. Those are those 31 projects that I mentioned to you. And by the way, I mentioned the 8, the 5, and the 3, but there's also the remaining 14 actually, 14 projects that are what we call modernization, which are basically upgrading aging or failing infrastructure today to include safety improvements for bike, ped, and bus pullouts across the entirety of the region. So that's the solid blue. The dash blue there at the bottom, we differentiated that because that is a study. That is an analysis of connecting Interstate 19 to Interstate 10. The Interstate 19 connection hasn't been finalized or formalized yet. It looks like the intersection or the interchange is at Rita Road on the we'll call it northeast side. And so we're working with our partners at ADOT, also the city of Tucson, Pima County, and Sahuarita to determine what that alignment looks like. But there are monies in the plan to study that alignment and really make sure that if we as a region agree that this is something that should be improved, then we can go after federal funding or other funding down the road. The last thing I'll point out are, one more, go back, I'm sorry, Melanie, are the bubbles. So you can see the bubbles there. Those are RTA, those are those 7 projects that are the RTA 1 projects that are included. So you can see that they're scattered. You can see North First, you can see 22nd Street. I mentioned those other projects, or I mentioned those 2 projects, but there are others as well. And those are where they show up on the map. Go ahead, Melanie, thanks. So this map really shows the projects that are in RTA 1. And again, it's an opportunity to show how broad the investment from RTA 1 is through December of 25. And you can see just the magnitude of improvement across the entirety of the region. And these are specific to bike and ped improvements. Next slide. So again, these are signalized intersections. They're hawks. And these are the ones that when someone wants to cross the main road, you press the button, it turns the lights, or turns the light, and then you're able to cross in the crosswalk. I will tell you that we do know from a University of Arizona study that these signals, these signalized pedestrian crossings, reduce pedestrian crashes by 50%, which is huge. We hear the cry for safer roads for all, not just for vehicles, but for everyone, bikes, peds, et cetera. And this we know is a great investment. Now, keep in mind that these are only in RTA 1. We do have in RTA Next, we have a similar investment. The reason those aren't listed is because those are data driven. Those are data driven based on information that we get from the jurisdictional partners, but also from feedback. We know that there's interest in hawks across the entirety of the region. And so we go out and we analyze them. Actually, we don't, but the jurisdictional partners do, and they can identify where they're going to be placed. Next slide, please. So this is a slide that really shows the investment, the value of the investment over the past 20 years. People have challenged me on it, and I'm fine with that. I can tell you that we did this independently in terms of the jobs created and the public and private investment totals. I will tell you that I think that the numbers are actually a little low when it comes to the public-private investment, simply because I remember in my previous world as city manager of Tucson, we had looked at an analysis, actually performed an analysis that showed the streetcar by itself had brought in over $4 billion in public and private investment along the corridor. But you can see the return on investment there. We have completed over 1,000 projects. The 1.6 billion is actually the money that we've brought in through the half-cent sales tax. And if you do the math, that number should be about 2.7 billion or 2.6 billion if it weren't for the $1 billion shortfall. Next slide. So what does the RTA Next investment look like in terms of the value, 48,000 jobs and an additional 3.7 billion in economic benefit? Again, I've been challenged on this. We hired Rounds Consulting out of Phoenix to perform an analysis of this, and that information is on our website. Feel free to go in and you can dissect it. I can tell you that I've used Jim Rounds for years on other projects, and they're really good at what they do. So I have a lot of confidence in these numbers myself. Next slide, please. So the next question is, what happens if there's not an RTA investment? So we asked Mr. Rounds and his team to look at that as well, and you can see the numbers are pretty self-explanatory. We're expecting or projecting about a 54,000 job loss, as well as a decrease of about $3.5 billion in investment. Next slide, please. So again, I think that looking at the entirety of the system, what would happen if to our lives if RTA Next were not to pass by the voters? And it takes two. It takes Proposition 418 and 419, but you have to be informed. You got to know what you're voting on. Well, that's the plan. But you also need to know, what does it mean if the answer is no, which is fine. You can see pretty self-explanatory. We do believe that there could be some cuts in services for transit folks. We know that the entirety of the transportation system would be impacted or could be impacted. I don't think that the infrastructure will deteriorate one day to the next. That will be a longer term deterioration that'll occur over the next many years, but you will definitely see that deterioration of the infrastructure, which again increases potentially congestion in some of the commuter times. Next slide. So one of the pieces that's important and a conversation that I've had with the board is, how can we be assured, and you hear terms like accountability and what does all that look like? And if you were short $1 billion before, what's to say you're not going to be short $1 billion in the future? I'm here to tell you I can't guarantee that. What I can tell you, though, is that the projections that we've used for RTA Next are the pessimistic projections. We originally hired the Eller College to run analyses for us, and this was back in 2006. They gave us 3 different levels. It was a pessimistic, a baseline, and an optimistic level. And at the time, we used the baseline. So we used the middle of the road, which seemed to make sense, except it didn't come to pass. This time around, we're actually using the pessimistic level. So that's, I think, a very important piece of that. But the other part of it that I think is important is the reconstitution of how the Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation, our CART committee, which is a citizen-appointed committee, will have oversight beyond what it did before. It had some oversight, but this time around, what we've suggested and what the board has approved and actually codified and memorialized is that the CART committee will actually make a quarterly update to the board. They'll actually do an analysis with information provided by the staff, which will provide the board with quarterly updates on 2 pieces. One is financial, and the second is delivery, schedule, basically. Now, if you look at this, this is not a look back. This is not to say, okay, things have gone really well to this point. Say you're in the 3rd year. It's to actually say, yeah, we've done fine to this point, but more importantly, what does the next 17 years look like? And so the CART will actually be working with the Technical Management Committee to develop scenarios, but also recommendations to the board. So if there were one piece that I wish we could change from RTA 1, it would be that we should have probably done that, and we should have been more public about it. Now, there was oversight. There's audits every 5 years. Those all came out great. But that open conversation will happen going forward, because on a quarterly basis, the CART, which is not filtered by staff, the Technical Management Committee, not filtered by staff. And by the way, the Technical Management Committee is made up of all the managers from the entirety of the region. All the administrators and managers from the region come together for all the municipalities, the county, and for the tribe and the nation. They come in and they will make a recommendation to the board. And that is a very public conversation about how the program's going. And if the program is not going the way that was projected or told the voters, there's an opportunity to go back to the voter and have a conversation with them about, hey, things aren't going, and here's some things we need to change. Again, the voter is the final say, but the highest level of accountability, at least in my world, is the voter. The voter is the one that will make those calls and give us direction ultimately on how those projects are to be completed if things don't go well. Now, keep in mind that this is an ongoing discussion. And so every quarter, there will be a public discussion about it, but there's also a focus on, okay, how do you project out what's going to happen 17 years from now? Well, every single meeting, every single conversation is to really look hard at all of those challenges that might be for any of the projects or programs through the entirety of the program. The last thing I'll suggest to you is the diversity of the region. The diversity of the region is such that what fits for the urban core does not necessarily fit for some of the other areas within the region and the community. So the needs of the Tucson urban core is very different than what's needed in Marana, very different than what's needed in Oro Valley or in Saudita or on the tribal lands. But I'm going to give you an example of how the investment region-wide, right, is important. And so I mentioned there's 5 interchanges that are in the RTA Next plan. 2 of those interchanges, one of them is Tangerine Road, which is in Marana. If you draw the lines, the boundaries, that's in Marana. The other is Rita Road, which is in the city of Tucson. I want to paint a scenario for you. When you go out during the peak hours, which is the busy time of day, usually in the afternoons after work, you go out to these interchanges and they are actually backing up onto the freeway, onto the main road, main part of the freeway, because there's not enough capacity on those off ramps, or there's too much congestion, et cetera. And so the discussion is, well, are those City of Tucson projects for Rita Road and Marana project for Tangerine, or are those of regional concern? And so when you have folks that are sitting on the main freeway, parked, basically waiting to get off the freeway, they're very vulnerable at that point. And my concern is at some point we could have a family or anyone sitting there on the freeway waiting to get off or exit, or maybe not. Maybe they're just parked behind because they can't get around the vehicles that are parked to get off. And you have a tractor trailer that comes down the freeway that people don't see, or that don't see the fact that it's stopped. We have a catastrophe. And all of a sudden, the question is that really a City of Tucson project, or is that a Marana project, or is it a regional project? And so I throw that out to you because, as I mentioned earlier, it doesn't matter what aspect of your life you want to pick on or look to or point to, but the transportation system is extremely important for every aspect of our lives, including the delivery of goods, services, and people. Next slide, please. This is my final slide, then I'll turn it over to John. This QR code, you should be able to get it off the screens. This QR code is actually the project list. The project list looks like this, and it actually has the projects that are listed throughout, and it has them not just for the road element, but it has all of the projects for the entirety of the program. And you can see and get into detail and look at that in as much detail as you like. And you can see down below, it's the rtanext.com website is what you can go to if you'd like to download any part of this. And we'll also have this presentation available to you, Barbara or Linda, whoever is appropriate, so that you can share it. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Mike. Barbara or Linda, anything before I get started? We okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, again, I'm sorry I was muted and couldn't find the mute button.
Okay.
But no, go for it.
Okay, thank you. I will not, definitely not be as long as Mike, but I think he's given you a very good perspective on where we are today and hopefully where we're going in the future. I want to look back because there's obviously questions these days about why do we need an RTA? Maybe we shouldn't have an RTA. Well, I want to go back in time to tell you what it was like to operate in Pima County, in our community, in the transportation area before RTA. As those of you who've been in Tucson for any length of time, for a longer length of time, let's say, will recall the growth that occurred in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that was headed towards Marana and Oro Valley, or the Far East Side, or even south towards Sahuarita. And because those areas were largely unincorporated, Pima County had a major responsibility for addressing the transportation needs of those areas. What did we do? Well, we certainly didn't have enough gas tax revenue coming in. As Mike has pointed out, there hasn't been an adjustment in the rate for over 30 years. So what we resorted to was bond authorization elections. So we floated bonds. We obviously can get some immediate cash out of that successful authorization, but we have to repay that. And from about 1973 to 2004, we had no less than 7 bond authorization elections in Pima County. Not all transportation, but a lot of it had to do with that. And one in particular that I got heavily involved with implementing was the 1997 bond election. That was for $350 million. But it turns out that was actually supported with what we and proposed as a revenue bond. So that meant we had to dedicate and obligate our transportation revenue, not the general obligation bonds, which are paid back by property taxes, but the revenues. And I can tell you in retrospect, that sounded like a very equitable approach. You're using transportation monies to pay for transportation improvements. However, what it did is it took such a big chunk out of our day-to-day transportation monies that we let our roadway surfaces deteriorate. We didn't have the money to go out there and do the kind of repairs, and Mike talked about it. You should really go back to new roadways every 7 to 10 years with some kind of significant rehabilitation effort, or at least some kind of a seal that will preserve and extend the life of that pavement. Pima County didn't have that available to it after the 1997 bond authorization, and what I have done, what I've been involved with since working with Pima County and retiring in 2017 is I've stayed involved with both the RTA and the Pima County Transportation Advisory Committee. What Pima County Transportation Advisory Committee has been challenged with for those last 7 or 8 years that it's been in existence is coming up with a way to repair all the roadway system, not just the local streets, but had to pay for the major routes as well. Well, as you can imagine, those are not cheap. The larger roadways, the bigger roadways, the much heavier pavement, they take a big chunk of the dollars available. So what does that do? That extends the length of time it takes to get to the entire system. I can tell you that I think Pima County has expended a great deal of money. I can't tell you the number off the top of my head, but it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars in those last 8 years, largely to deal with local roads, your neighborhood streets that haven't been touched in 30 and 40 years, which is outrageous, but that's a reality. So anyway, one of the things that Mike didn't touch on too heavily during the presentation was that this new program actually has money in it for rehabilitation, but it's not for the local streets, and it's not for filling potholes. It's for upgrading those major routes, the arterial collector system, that are, as I said, very expensive for any local government to take on by themselves. But let me go back and talk a little bit more about the bond effort. When Pima County put together those bond programs, obviously, as a board of supervisors, the board, Pima County board, is supposed to represent the entire region. And I think I can say honestly, there was a good attempt to at least reflect the needs of some of the incorporated areas to some extent, but quite honestly, the challenges in the unincorporated area with the growth that went on that ultimately resulted in the incorporation of Marana, Oro Valley, Sahuarita, and even the Native American nations, all those needs were there, but I'm not sure that they were necessarily adequately reflected in the programs that were generated by Pima County to address them. But the effort was made. That's all I can tell you. Contrast that with the governance structure that Mike's been talking about. At least you have the mayors of the incorporated communities, you have the leaders of the Native American nation, you have ADOT representative. You've got an entire region of responsible individuals getting together and saying, how best do we allocate the limited amount of money we have? And I can tell you that bond authorization election in 1997, as significant as it was $350 million for roads, is only a quarter of what we're talking about here for RTA Next. So, and yet, you know, there was obviously some challenges with assuring that there was passage of that authorization election. And by the way, you know, again, I said 7 bond authorization elections over a course of 30 years. That's a lot of work. You have to try and do the best you can to not only put together the plan and the program and then go out and communicate to the public what it is they would get if they supported the bond election that you're proposing to them. Obviously, we did the best we could in Pima County, but I can't tell you that it's as region-wide as I think the RTA Next is trying to be. The other thing Mike talked about was the proposed involvement of the leaders, the managers of the jurisdictions. In addition to those people that Mike mentioned, there's several of us in the private sector that have some background in transportation that are also there as part of the technical management committee. And I think it's appropriate that we, as experienced individuals, get a chance to look over the shoulders of our current local government and jurisdictional managers to see if we agree or disagree with what they're coming up with in the way of a plan, agree or disagree with what's being proposed for improvements. In fact, the Technical Management Committee, a subcommittee of that group that I was involved with, did an analysis of First Avenue that Mike was talking about, and we definitely concluded that 6 lanes today are not needed. We thought they needed them back in 2006. We don't need them today. And so I think there's an important role to be played by having some members of the public also engage directly with some of these advisory groups. The important thing that I hear about today going forward, of course, is that the board of directors will be informed about what the Technical Management Committee is suggesting and is perhaps authorizing or encouraging that there be a review of the plan as developed to adjust it to the current day. And if there's a regret that I have about the original RTA is that there was, as Mike mentioned, we try to be optimistic about the revenues coming back. But we probably should have been more open with the public about what happens if they don't. And we never did that, to my knowledge. And I know from my years serving in the public sector, the last thing you want to do is go to your leaders or your bosses and say, oh, by the way, that program we gave you 5 years ago, it's not coming together the way we thought. I see by Mike's grin, that's the last thing he ever wanted to do, and me too. You know, it's just not the way you want to endear yourself to your bosses, but that has to happen. I mean, 20 years is a long time to look out and say, okay, will the revenues come in? Will the traffic patterns stay the same? Will the needs in the transportation area, whether it's transit, whether it's bicycles, whether it's alternate modes of other sorts, you know, we're wrestling, Mike mentioned it, we're wrestling with fuel-efficient vehicles, many more miles driven, no revenue generated from gas taxes because they're not using gas. So lots of challenges, but I guess I'm suggesting to you that while there are alternatives to this approach of a regional transportation authority, they're not any easier. And with that, Mike, I'm going to leave it at that, or Barbara, and if you want to, unless there's something else you want me to touch on.
No, I thank you for giving us a history and a little background to everything that Mike was talking about. But you did kind of lead into one of the first questions, and that's how is the RTA going to have greater transparency in the future?
You want me to address that, John?
Yes, Mike.
Okay. So thank you for the question, Barbara, and whoever asked that. Accountability and transparency has really been something I've focused on all my career. And I can tell you that there's some opportunities, and I'm going to call them structural changes that we've already made here, which is that openness to how decisions are made and conversations that are happening. I think it's important to really focus on those projections that I mentioned, that quarterly reporting, because that's really going to be the key, in my opinion, to not only the transparency of what's going on, but also what are recommendations? What are we doing and how are we approaching things? As John mentioned, maybe we could have been a little more open before, but we are now where we are. And so it's the opportunity to make sure that those projections, and I'll call it the entirety of the program, is dissected every quarter. And that's a tall order. I mean, if you think about it, every quarter we're going to be making sure, and like John said, nobody wants to give bad news. It seems like I've made a living out of giving people bad news, and I'm sorry for that. But the reality is that it has to be open. It has to be an open discussion. And so the way that accountability will work, and it's been codified, is on a quarterly basis, the Citizens Oversight Group, which has, by the way, more representation from the city of Tucson. It's got 4 members. Everybody else has 1, including 1 member that has transit focus. That makes up that Citizens Oversight. And then the Technical Management Committee, what John didn't mention is that's been reconstituted as well. The city has 3 members on that group, the county has 2 members on that group, all the other jurisdictions have 1 member on that group. So that there is an understanding that, hey, these folks, these investments within the city and within the county are greater, and they require feedback and input. But that we'll call it quarterly reporting will be the key to the accountability and transparency going forward.
Great, thank you.
Barbara, let me add one thing that we haven't touched on at all, and I know I've read some of the concerns about the fact that there was a citizen advisory committee formed to help develop this plan. And the criticism has been that they really weren't listened to. They were just kind of pushed aside. But I will tell you, sitting through those meetings over 2 or 3 years, a lot of great ideas came forward and a lot of emphasis on other than roadway travel. And I think that's appropriate. And I think the ultimate plan really does reflect a lot more of that than it would have had that Citizen Advisory Committee not been around.
Well, thank you. How much of the funding will go to Phoenix and how much to Tucson, Pima County?
Well, this gives me great pleasure to say 0 goes to Phoenix because all of this money stays here. And that is extremely important. Again, if you remember that graphic that I showed you, it really is about local. It's about the local decision making. It's about the local conversation. That is not a function of what's going on in Phoenix or us having to how to pay to Phoenix. Barbara, I do want to make one point that I think you've may have made when we first started. This conversation for me is really about information. I want to make sure folks they have accurate information. None of the questions bother me. I mean, we may disagree, and that's okay. That's fine. But I want to make sure that people are well informed so that when they go to I was going to say go to the polls, when they get their ballot in the mail, hopefully later this week, that they're well informed and they make an informed decision. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you. And yes, the ballots are going out today. So please be sure to vote. When will Downtown Links underpass be done?
Sure. Yeah, great question. Thank you. I appreciate that. So as a commuter that uses that corridor on occasion, like every morning and every afternoon, I've been asking the same question. So let me give you a little background on that because I think it's important. So the short answer is it'll be completed here before the summer. And so we're expecting, we actually wanted to have the ribbon cutting was scheduled for, I think it was late March, but I think it's going to probably go into April or early May. When you do projects in the urban core and you're dealing with utilities and the railroad, those are components that are outside of anyone's control. And by the way, I'm gonna defend the city a little bit on this one, even though I don't need to, and they don't pay me to do that anymore. But I can tell you that when you're doing projects like Grant Road, another project people ask about that. Grant Road, the parts that are under construction today, they'll be finished by the end of the calendar year. But we haven't necessarily told a lot of people that, and that's part of the conversation. It's like, guys, we need to let people know. Now, people have asked, why does it take so long? Well, when you're dealing with outside entities like utility companies and like the railroad, we don't have control. So we're at their mercy, if you will, for when they relocate utilities. But people have also asked on Grant Road, why can't we do that faster? It's been years under construction. Well, quite frankly, it's a conversation about the corridor as a whole and the business community along that corridor. We could get it done a lot faster if we closed it, right? And we put crews on it and got it going. But that's not realistic when it comes to the business community that's along that corridor or some of the residents, quite frankly. And so we've really tried to find that balance, right? Of how do we get these projects delivered, being respectful to folks that are trying to make a living along that corridor. And so anyway, I appreciate the question. Thank you for the opportunity to expand on it a little bit.
Actually, you brought up sort of another question, and that's some projects might mean residents or businesses are displaced. What is the process in that, and what happens to those people?
Sure. Actually, a great question. I didn't mention that there is money set aside that we call it's called administrative, and so it looks like well it's just administration. It's actually not. It's specific for there is some administrative costs, but it's also for small business advocacy and development. And so the idea there is we do have a person and they have a group that will go out and help businesses during construction. If there's right-of-way acquisition that's necessary, in other words, we have to buy up property for a project, then those property owners are assisted as well. And so those dollars are built into the program as a whole. The other component of administration is debt service, assuming that things go well and we can make it a well-oiled machine in the first 5 or 6 years of the program. My goal is that we would go out to the open market and sell bonds to complete the rest of the program sooner than the 20 years. So that's all contained within that administrative element.
Thank you. What safety measures do you incorporate in bike lanes, bike paths?
So clearly, there's a difference between a separated bike lane or bike path or bike facility and one that's incorporated in a roadway. All of those are designed to the federal standards for bicycle and pedestrian. And so those are incorporated. I know I was part of the Complete Streets or the Move Tucson effort that was put forth and established by the city of Tucson. Extremely important to look at the entirety of the transportation system, not just one aspect. And so those standards are adhered to, and we make sure that as we go down the path of no pun intended there, as we go down this path, that they are building up to those standards that will keep people safe along those corridors.
Barbara, if I may,
Yeah.
I want to touch on the on bike paths because I know we all really appreciate the comfort and safety of the loop that is completely off roadway, and I know most of you know the background of that, but it really resulted from a flood control improvement along the major water courses in our region with the soil cement that we put on the banks and then added the recreational amenity on top of that. I think that was great. Unfortunately, you can't do that on every roadway facility to have a separate bike path. So it is a challenge, I think, to come up with safe bike routes along our major routes.
Thank you. Who is paying for all the vote yes signs that we see all over Tucson.
Not us, not PAG or RTA. I can tell you that. A political action committee, a separate group, is responsible for that. We cannot be involved in that, as I've mentioned. I am only in the role of information. I can't be in the advocacy role at all or pay for it with any public funds.
What goes into the job loss calculation?
So, hey, John, by the way, I'm sorry to just jump in there and answer these if you want to. Just
No, I'll jump
you're
in.
happy.
No problem.
So the job loss calculation, as I mentioned, was actually a part of the analysis that was done by Rounds Consulting. So we asked them the potential economic impact of the RTA Next program, but then we also asked what is the loss, if you will, both in terms of jobs and economic impact. And so that came directly from Rounds Consulting. Again, that study is online. It's under I believe it's under RTA Mobility or RTAnext.com.
Great. What about the many roads that have been in major disrepair for many years and are not mentioned in the next plan? Why does Pima County continue to have so many roads in incredible disrepair for so long? I don't know that you can answer that.
I really can. I think, John, maybe you might be able to help.
Well, I can tell you, if you look, and I will admit that I'm not so sure Pima County's done as good a job as they should of publicizing the progress that they've made. But back almost 10 years ago now, Pima County had established a goal of having their entire roadway system reach at least an 80% of those roads being good or excellent in their condition, and they're making great progress towards that. I mean, it's absolutely true though that there are many miles still out there that are in bad and disrepair and have needed attention for quite some time. And as I said, that's why I think it's important that the new plan has some money in it for the arterial and major routes, because that'll allow the local jurisdiction, not just the county, Oro Valley, Marana, Sahuarita, they all have much younger road systems, but they'll get there. They'll get to the point where they're going to need the attention. And by the region having money for the major transportation system, it'll allow the incorporated communities to focus on their own local road system with those monies.
That's an excellent point, John. What I would also add is in my conversation with the Oro Valley Town Council, that issue was brought up exactly in terms of, hey, our road's in pretty good shape today, and we really don't need pavement rehabilitation. And I said, you're right, and that's great. Your infrastructure is fairly new, but 20 years from now, you're probably going to need a shot in the arm, because you're looking at the age of the infrastructure as a whole, not just in one pocket or one area. Thanks, John. That was a good response.
There's a question or two about comparing the city and the county, but that's really not the RTA.
No, it's not.
So we won't move on from that. You have some line items that would go through Vail or be in Vail. What happens if Vail incorporates? What happens to that funding? Will those roadways just stop the work on it, or?
Absolutely not. So keep in mind that regardless of the jurisdiction, if you look at the list, it doesn't say what jurisdiction those improvements are in necessarily. And so once the voter has spoken, if it's approved under Proposition 418 and the funding 419, then those improvements are they're basically on the schedule. It's irrespective of the jurisdiction or if it's incorporated or not in the future.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question you've probably been dreading and knew was coming. Some, maybe all, of the explosive growth of Marana, Vail, and Sahuarita in the last 10 years has been characterized as irresponsible and without planning for paying of infrastructure. Why should Tucson, which has only grown less than 1% per year, pay for roads for subdivisions whose developers did not pay for projected needed infrastructure? Isn't Tucson subsidizing the lower cost of housing and cost of living in these areas?
That's a great question, and I don't dread it. And quite frankly, I have dissected over the years, and I think it's important. So if you don't mind, John, I'll take a stab at it.
Absolutely.
Maybe you can add to it as well.
Absolutely.
So, unfortunately or fortunately, I know the numbers pretty well in terms of population, and Tucson's population is at about 51.3% of the region. So, just shy or just over half of the region's population resides in Tucson. The actual revenue that's generated within the city of Tucson is about 62, I think it's 62.7% of the revenue that's, again, total sales tax is generated in the city of Tucson. Okay. So now let's talk about what that means and what that looks like in terms of RTA Next. The current RTA Next plan shows the city receiving about 51.22% of the improvement. So if you look very simplistically, the city of Tucson's value, and again, I went over earlier how you just draw a line based on the current limits of the city and the municipalities, et cetera, and you allocate those dollars there. That's about 51.22%. But there's also a plan that's codified, by the way, to get the city to 55% of the total revenue. So let's go back to the revenue projections. And I mentioned to you that we are using the pessimistic level. The pessimistic level has between 20 and 25% probability of occurring. So basically what that means is 75 to 80% probability that the revenues will be greater than what is projected in that pessimistic or that at that pessimistic level. So what I suggested to the board is, look, we want it to be very clear if we get more money to come into the plan, what happens to that? And so two things occurred. One is we allocate an amount up to 75% of that excess revenue to go to the city of Tucson until they reach 55%. So ultimately, assuming that the probability of getting more revenue comes to pass, they will get 55% of the current plan. Okay. Now, I can also tell you that when you look at the revenue that's generated within the city, where does it come from? And so even though the shopping occurs in the urban core, it comes from the other areas that are maybe not within that urban core. And so when you start looking at traffic patterns, it really speaks to the need for a broader thought in terms of how you move from one point to the region to the other. Okay, so that's on, we'll call it the share. And I've talked to Mayor Romero extensively about that. I mean, I talked to her before I left and I've talked to her since. And she now believes that given the way that we have structured the plan, that it is a good deal for the city. And I forget the exact words she used, but basically that's what she is saying. And she said that publicly, she said at council meetings and that. But now let's talk about Marana and even Vale and some of the other areas where this conversation around urban sprawl goes. If you look at the plan list, if you look at this list that I mentioned to you that you get the QR code on, there's a column that says non-RTA funding. Matter of fact, I'll say it's committed non-RTA dollars. That's the actual title of that column. That is grant money, that's other regional money that we've identified and committed, but it also includes impact fees from developers. And so we have already built into the plan the developers of these outlying areas, if you will, that have hundreds, if not thousands of unbuilt lots that were approved years ago that will have to pay their fair share based on a formula that's quite frankly established by going through analysis on what the cost per house is and all the things that go along with that. They will pay their share as a part of those committed dollars. And if approved by the voters, that community is roped in. They have to pay for that additional cost, if you will. So when I hear that, I understand it. But I can also tell you it's a regional plan. Again, the value I've already outlined for you in terms of from the region's perspective, right? But that column specifically commits non-RTA dollars, which one component of is impact fees. And we've had each community, we've had the county for Vale, we've had Marana, Oro Valley, basically anywhere there are vacant tracts of land that will ultimately have some development, we've counted for those in the plan. John, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that the mention of impact fees. I know that's a controversial topic in itself because I know in Pima County, whenever we updated our fees, generally we got a response that they weren't high enough, that we weren't getting enough out of the developers. And I will tell you, it's very difficult to have a viable land development project if you kind of overburden them with a major transportation or a flood control or whatever other facility you might be talking about. It just won't happen if you price them out of that. And some people would suggest that's good. You stop growth. Well, I suggest to you, no, that's not the job that we have as responsible planners. I hope that we've got a look to the future, and it was always a challenge. Like I told you, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we were extending Thornydale Road north, La Cañada, La Choya, Ina Road east and west. I mean, all of those roads were two-lane roads essentially, and then you had growth just completely overwhelmed them. And so you never have a perfect system of having the developers pay their share.
Okay. How much for non-fossil fuel transit compared to fossil fuel transit of all types of transportation, not only road users, including light rail, actual railroad, all that?
What, can you repeat that again? It faded right at the end
How
there.
much
I
money
just didn't
goes
hear
for
the last.
non-fossil fuel transit compared to fossil fuel transit,
Okay, so
including
I
all
don't
that?
know. I don't know the exact answer to that. I'll have to get that. And if you don't mind, I'll find out and I can get it back to you. What I do know, though, is before I left the city, we actually unveiled a couple of electric buses that were on a trial basis to try to figure out how to get that platform, if you will. And there's pretty much most of the fleet is in compressed natural gas. But there was a movement towards I'll use the term electrifying the bus fleet. But I'm sorry, I don't know the exact number. I'll have to get that to you, and I can provide that to you, Barbara, and then you can distribute it as you see appropriate.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Related to the comment about explosive growth, we're getting back to that. Couldn't improved transit options reduce the need for road widening and connections to I-10? And also, how much of the traffic is also the responsibilities of counties to the east of Pima County?
Yes. So great thought there. And I would say to you, yes, expanded transit could reduce congestion. But keep in mind that transit is also a function of density. And so that would basically mean that most folks would live in the urban core where transit options could be provided to them. And so, although yes, in a we'll call it a very defined area, that could be the case, but on a much bigger scale for 1 million people across several hundred square miles, that is a very expensive option that, quite frankly, there's not enough money for across the board. With regard to the comment about shouldn't counties to the east and basically everybody else, absolutely, I'm all in that. What I can tell you is, again, I keep going back to the document. If you look at the amount of RTA tax money that's going into the interstate, the traffic interchange improvements, it's very small in comparison to the state and federal money that's coming into the region. And so in essence, we are leveraging the local money to get more state and federal money that comes from everybody else. And so that including ourselves, but it also gives the state and the federal government the opportunity to be part of the solution for a lot of these improvements. It's a good question.
Right. And both of y'all can probably answer this. How much money do we get from Phoenix for our roads?
So, the combined Phoenix and federal government or DC was 54 million. Let me look and see. I've got it on that map. I can tell you. It was the blue, I think. Let me look real quick here. So the state funding is about 33 million a year in that ballpark.
Okay, how much money is projected to come from the city of Tucson versus projects planned for the city? I don't know if either one of y'all could answer that.
Well, I think I
I think Mike
mentioned,
can.
yeah, I think I mentioned that before, and I don't have the percentages. I don't have the actual dollar amount. But as I mentioned, the latest analysis that I saw, the revenue that's collected in the city is about 62.7%. And ultimately, the city would receive 55% of the revenue. I mean, excuse me, of the investment.
I'm looking to see. How do you plan to have to be more responsive to individuals as projects go?
Yeah, so that really is the opportunity for us, I think, going forward with these quarterly updates. Because again, and what I didn't say was the Citizens Oversight Committee, although they oversee the program as a whole, it also provides an avenue for residents to voice concerns, grievances, those kinds of things that, again, not filtered by staff, not filtered by anyone, goes specifically to the CART, that Citizens Oversight Group. And that's huge. I mean, that gives them an unfiltered opportunity to go and be heard with a recommendation directly to the RTA board. So that really is in my opinion, the mechanism for making sure that continues.
I see a lot of chatter on this chat, but I don't see any more questions that we have not asked directly. So I thank you both for coming and giving us the information about the RTA, which is what we were asking for, and we appreciate your time.
Barbara, I have one closing thought, please. Um, I believe that, generating a plan like this that would satisfy everybody's desires is a virtual impossibility. And I will tell you myself, if I had to generate the plan on my own, it might look different than what we have in front of us. However, the tax is what's important to me. As I told you, it's difficult to generate dollars for these kinds of needs, and so a funding gap. If this doesn't go, and it may not, the funding gap would be a real issue, I think, for our region. It'll slow things down. It'll extend the projects that are already on the books, and it'll just make things a little more costly and frankly not serve us well if we lose the half-cent sales tax going forward.
Well, thank you. And thank you both so very much for your time and your effort. And thank you to the audience. You asked some very good questions, and we're glad that our speakers were able to answer them. And that's all for today's presentation.
Thank you.
I would
Thank you,
like to
Barbara,
make,
for having
can
us.
I make one comment before we end, please? Thank you. We did have some questions here about hearing the other side. So here's what I'd like to say to you all. This was not presented as a debate. This was simply information from the local tax proposal from the city who is making this presentation to all of you. We don't have a position, and we were just presenting to you the facts that were presented to us today by Mike and John. So please keep that in mind. I would urge you, if you'd like to hear from the other groups, there are probably about 6 groups in the community right now who are opposing this, and I would contact them directly and ask them for their opinions and their information, just as you've listened to the information from the people making the proposal for continuing the RTA. So thank you very much. We do always want to provide the most accurate information for you in our Zooms. Did you want to add something, Mike? No? Okay. And John,
Thumbs up.
No,
once
thank you
again,
very much.
thank you, Barbara, for moderating, and thank you all for listening. Have a great
Take care.
afternoon.
Thank
Bye.
you. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you
Bye.
all.